Hey there guys, this is New Order, and today I'm going to teach you the very basics of Blood Bowl, so that when we walk into our first match, you'll have a decent enough understanding of the game to not be overwhelmed. At the start of a Blood Bowl match, there's a coin flip. The winner gets to choose whether or not to kick or receive at the start. There's 16 turns in a Blood Bowl match with a halftime, so if you kick at the start, you get to receive the ball at the half. So each team sets up their players, and the kicking team kicks off to the receiving team. Every kickoff, a kickoff event happens. There's a bunch of them, and they're not really relevant to this video, but they can definitely affect how the match goes. The ball hits the ground, and the match can start. When you take control of your team, you move the players around one at a time. You can move a player a number of squares up to their movement allowance stat, which, if you click on a player, is down in the bottom right, next to their skills that they have. Beyond that, there are two more movement squares called going for it's. If you want to going for it, you have to roll a d6 dice, and rolling low means your player trips over their own feet and fall to the ground. This causes a turnover and you lose your turn, sending control of the board to your opponent. Your player can also get seriously hurt or just straight up die from tripping over their own feet, which is not only embarrassing but can put you at a disadvantage, so going for it is something you shouldn't really do unless you really need to. If you try to run your players past an opponent, as in moving through the squares right next to your opponent's player, that player will attempt to trip your guy up and make him fall on his face. In order to make it past him, you need to make a dodge roll. This is an agility-based roll, so having a high agility stat makes it easier to get through that danger. If you fall over on your dodge roll, your player gets tripped up and they fall to the ground. Again, this causes a turnover, so you lose your turn, and your player has a chance of getting hurt or dying. As I said, the higher agility, the easier the dodge is. Dodging straight into a group of enemies makes the dodge harder than if you were just getting away from a single enemy. Each player in the game has a tackle zone, which is the box around them. For each player's tackle zone that you try to dodge into, the roll gets incrementally harder, so dodging into 2 tackle zones is 1 easier than dodging into 3 tackle zones, and so on and so on. However, there's a hard limit as to how hard or how easy any dice roll is. Rolling a 1 means you will always fail whatever you were trying to do. So even if your player is the king of dodging, he's going to fall over if he rolls a 1. Likewise, rolling a 6 means you will always succeed. So, if your giant sentient tree monster needs that 6 in order to catch the winning pass and win you the game, that's possible. The takeaway from this is that in Blood Bowl, anything is possible. It's just, sometimes really, really hard or really, really easy. Each team, if they fail an action, has a pool of team rerolls. It's located up in the top left for either team. They each have their own set of rerolls. You get to use one of these a turn if you fail an action that would cause a turnover, so failing a dodge, tripping over your own feet on a going for it, rolling a bad block, etc. Like I said, you can only use one of these a turn, so if you use up your team reroll and then something bad happens, you're just stuck with it. At some point, you'll probably want to dish out the murder a little more directly than just watching elves faceplant due to their own incompetence, or watching humans trip over their own feet and hit the turf. This comes in the form of a block. When you go to block an opponent, you need to be standing next to them. You can't run up to a player and then punch them. When you go to throw the block, you compare your strength stat to theirs. Based on these strength numbers, you roll block dice, which are the same as a normal 6-sided die, but they have little pictures instead of numbers. The worst roll on a block die is a skull. If you roll a skull, your player gets knocked down by your opponent. As you might guess, your turn ends, the player has a chance to get hurt or killed. Rolling a both down means both you and your opponent get knocked down and could possibly die. However, because you got knocked down, your turn ends and your opponent takes over. There's a skill in the game, it's one of the essential skills of the game, it's called block. If you have block and you roll a both down, you just don't go down. So in the case where your player has block and the opponent does not, you get to stay upright, but your opponent goes to the ground, and vice versa. Rolling a push means that you just shove your opponent out of the way. You can follow up and occupy the square that they're in, or you could just shove them away from you and stay where you are. On the surface, this may seem a little useless, but if you're able to push your opponent out of the way and clear a path, this sometimes could be all it takes to actually go score. Or if you're a little more ambitious, you could push your opponent's player out of bounds. Doing this not only knocks them out of play until the next kickoff, it causes your fans to storm the sidelines and beat the hell out of the guy, possibly harming or killing them. Rolling a defender stumbles or a defender down is when you start getting into the good stuff. That's when you really hit your opponent and can really do some damage. You send them flying away like you would a push, but you also knock them to the ground, which could cause them harm or death. Again, you can choose to follow them up, or you can choose to stay in the square you're in. If you haven't picked this up yet, there's a lot of harm or death going on in Blood Bowl. I mean, the word blood is right in the title after all. Anytime your player falls down, either by their own incompetence or by the hands of an opposing player, a bunch of dice get rolled to see how bad they get hurt. This could mean your player simply has to lie on the ground for a turn or two, catching their breath, or it could be as bad as your player suffering a permanent crippling injury, which could cause a stat decrease or immediate death on the pitch. Like I said before, comparing strength stats lets you know how many block dice to roll. If you and your opponent have equal strength, you roll one dice block and you take that result, no matter what it is. If you have higher strength than your opponent, you roll 2 dice blocks and you pick which of the 2 is the result. If your opponent has higher strength than you and you for whatever reason choose to punch them, you roll 2 dice blocks and your opponent gets to choose which of the 2 is the result. If you remember from earlier, I was talking about team rerolls. In this case, when you throw blocks, you have the opportunity to use those team rerolls if the 2 outcomes or even the 1 outcome is not one that is favorable to you. So if you really want to punch someone who's higher strength than you, you might need to bring some friends. If you stand an allied player next to an opponent, you can artificially increase their strength score by a point. So if your player has 3 strength and your opponent has 4, throwing a block would mean rolling 2 dice and he gets to pick the result. However, if you bring 2 of your own players and stand them next to your opponent, each one gives a temporary +1 to strength, meaning your player now is artificially strength 5. And that means that you get to throw 2 dice blocks and you get to choose. The reverse of this is also true. If you're standing next to 2 opponents and you try to punch one, the other one will give a +1 to his ally, so your opponent's strength score, meaning if you are standing next to 2 strength 3 players, your opponent will artificially be strength 4. So you got to be careful when you're punching and where your players are standing when you want to start punching. You know how I said you couldn't move and throw a block in the same turn? Well, I was sort of lying. Once per turn, one of your players can do what's called a blitz. When you blitz, you move your player up to an opponent, punch them, and then can keep running away. Planning a well-timed blitz is the key to punching through your opponent's defense, or getting a good hit on their ball carrier. But like I said, you can only use it once, so you've got to be careful when you want to use it. Of course, the whole point of Blood Bowl is actually picking up that spiked football and scoring. Picking up the ball is an agility roll like dodging, and like dodging, it gets harder if there's more opponents standing around the ball. If you go to pick up the ball and you fail, it flies out of your hands and scatters to the ground. This again causes an immediate turnover, and it can also be re-rolled with a team re-roll. Once you have the ball, you obviously want to go score, which means you need to protect your ball carrier and get him to the end zone. If your opponent punches your ball carrier, either through a normal block or a blitz, and your ball carrier gets knocked down, the ball flies out of his hands and bounces around. The ball carrier can get the ball to other players on your team by either running up to them and handing it off, or by passing it to them from a distance. Again, both of these actions are agility-based, so high agility players have an easier time with it. Handing it off is much easier than passing, but some of the more agility-focused teams like Elves thrive on a good pass game. Failing a handoff or a pass can send the ball flying out of your hands and landing on the pitch, again causing a turnover. You can only do 1 pass and 1 handoff per turn. Eventually, someone will get the ball to their end zone and score. All the players are set up again, and the team that scored gets to kick the ball to the team who was scored on. Additionally, the player who actually walked the ball into the end zone gets some experience points, which in Blood Bowl are called star player points. You also get star player points from punching an opponent so hard that you cause a casualty, which were death or crippling injuries of those sort of injuries. When you get enough SPP, your players level up. It's star player points. When you get enough star player points, your players level up, and you get to pick a new skill for them. There's a ton of skills in the game, so we'll be covering them as they come up. So after 16 turns of punching and scoring, you reach the end of the match. Barring a tie, one team walks away with a victory. At the end of every match, an MVP for each team is crowned at random. Even if your player died on the first turn by tripping over his own feet, he's just as likely to get the posthumous MVP honor as the guy in your team who scored all the touchdowns. Being named MVP comes with a sizable amount of star player points, which is great if it goes to your best player and not so great if it goes to the dead guy. So as you might be able to tell, there's a lot of game-specific knowledge and information going on here. And this is just, the basic episode trying to introduce it from square zero. Additionally, there's a lot of complex and convoluted mechanics and strategy, which even a tabletop game spurglord might have some trouble picking up in such a short time. However, if you made it through this video, you should have a good enough baseline knowledge to understand what's going on when the actual matches start getting played. And hopefully I've piqued your interest enough that you stick around and help me build this team that I'm playing as. So go vote, and I'll see you for the first match.